Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on green hydrogen, very important, especially after this wire, different organizations and especially energy ministries, they are taking preparations for the new technology, new innovations because they need alternative. Green hydrogen is a very, very important for these sectors, and we actually get a lot of request from our audience, especially from energy ministry, from different research organizations, those who work. So I want to give a special thanks for this episode, especially those who join as a speaker. All of them actually expert on that particular point. We have our Professor Ching, Mr. Marshall, Professor Rob, and Professor Paul. First, I would like to give chance Professor Rob.
Okay, I get to go first. So hydrogen comes in a bunch of colors, apparently. We're focused on green hydrogen now. There are other derivatives. For instance, blue hydrogen is a mix of hydrogen and natural gas. Each of the different colors represents a different way of creating the hydrogen. Most of them are not particularly green. Green hydrogen gets hydrogen as a process using solar energy. And the reason it's called green is because the production side is green, and thus it kind of completes that loop. Hydrogen, when it's burned, creates water. It is, however, highly volatile, as the folks that were in the Hindenburg suddenly discovered, and its molecular density is very light. In other words, pipes that may be okay for natural gas may not be okay for hydrogen, depending on how they're sealed. So the issue with hydrogen is not that it doesn't burn green. It's the transport, storage, and creation. Right now, hydrogen's relatively expensive to create. It is not price competitive with natural gas. The United Nations has been pretty aggressive in terms of doing conversions to hydrogen from other fuel sources, and has increased their capacity from about twice over the last few years. But it's still pretty small. The benefits of hydrogen is in terms of over electricity or direct electricity. Is you don't because you can put it in a tank and you can burn it like you would the gasoline, and you can convert a gasoline-powered car to hydrogen. That it's thought to be less disruptive to the existing automotive environment, but we don't have. I mean, much like we did with electricity a few years back, and still do to a certain extent. We don't have much infrastructure. So the targeted area for green hydrogen is either for burning fuel, and as an alternative to natural gas, or for transportation, for anything that's long haul. So electricity is fine for short haul trucking, but because it lacks infrastructure as well, long haul trucking doesn't lend itself to electricity. It may lend itself to hydrogen, where you converted the truck stops on interstates from gasoline to hydrogen. And that might be a relatively inexpensive way to bring hydrogen in and replace gasoline, but only for long haul trucking. Replacing gas stations with hydrogen stations would be excessively expensive, and as I've mentioned, hydrogen isn't cost competitive at the moment. New Hydrogen is one of the companies that recently popped up with a less expensive way to create hydrogen. So be aware that this technology is advancing as I speak, and the gore point is at the creation phase. If we can get the cost of creating hydrogen down, so at least it's much more competitive with natural gas in terms of pricing, then it suddenly becomes cost competitive and viable. I believe the European Union is actually planning on trying to ship hydrogen out of Africa to displace or to replace natural gas. The numbers, at least as I've looked at it so far, don't look promising. It's already expensive to create, and then shipping the gas as opposed to piping it would increase that cost even more. So I'm not too sure that at least the particular point, I'm not sure that's viable. It might make more sense to look at advanced hydrogen manufacturing capability and put it much closer to where it's going to be used. But that's it for me on green hydrogen as a start.
Thank you. Professor Paul, what you want to add for today's discussion? Today is very important, green hydrogen.
Sorry, can I go in a minute after the other people first?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Professor Ching.
Well, this is a subject which I was heavily involved in in hydrogen in fuel cells, because I was asked to consult on a fuel cell company, the Bloom Energy. Okay, this company pretty much gave a full picture of the state of art of hydrogen energy. It was IPO'd just before my client decided to buy it. So my client was too late. As far as I know, I recommend to buy it, basically, because even with the understanding that it was not profitable, it has to depend on government subsidy. But the company seemed to be a necessary item for some data centers, huge data centers. They use containers to put the fuel cell in, so it's easy to transport to the data center. They are used as battery backup. I understand some car company are trying to produce some kind of hydrogen future for cars, for car energy. But all this still, all of them, I don't think they're economically, can break even. Basically, the idea is you use electrolysis to produce hydrogen and then combine with oxygen to produce electricity. And the idea has been been with us for as far as I can remember. When I was at MIT, I was undergraduate, freshman. I joined your freshman seminar, which discussed fuel cells. So it's been such a long time since then. It's still not profitable, but it's needed. And I will even, after looking over the whole picture, I will even recommend it. So this is where my personal experience is. And again, I have to give a whole picture of this energy, the whole energy picture. I would still think eventually we probably need to depend on nuclear energy. And make it safe. Some people claim that they can take care of the waste. And there will be position for all type of energies, depending on what's it used for. For data center, I would say this fuel cell is good enough. They don't care about the cost. You see, those people, they don't care about cost, they don't care about how much they heat up the water nearby. Okay, so it's a very costly operation. This data center, they wouldn't care. They just want something convenient, and you have a container-like object used as a battery backup. That to them is good enough. So that pretty much my my suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. You are climate change activist. What you want to add for today's discussions, and why green hydrogen called green?
That's a good question, Sharif. Green hydrogen is significantly it's supposed to significantly lower carbon emissions than, let's say, typical hydrogen, which is also now called gray hydrogen. I think Rob pointed out that now we've attributed all these hydrogens to different colors. There's blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen, green hydrogen. Next thing you know, there's going to be mauve hydrogen. I'm just kidding there, but basically, green hydrogen, as Rob pointed out, is pretty much defined as being created through renewable power or energy, and that's what makes it green, supposedly. It's not just from the source that Rob pointed out. There are other methods of creating green hydrogen. I must point out something, though. Green hydrogen is now in big arguments going on right now because of the fact that fossil fuel companies, coal companies, big ag, and big agriculture companies are actually behind this transition to green hydrogen. And that makes the whole concept suspect by environmentalists. But just to be more specific, the green hydrogen, as I said, is supposedly created through renewable energy. And another method is to, as I think Hugh pointed out, he brought it up in his issue, is that, you can create energies, and there's going to be a whole panoply of markets of energy sources for renewable energies. But and nuclear may play a role there. But with regard to today's topic, which is green hydrogen, I would say that it's produced, by the way, by the electrolysis of water, and it's less than 0.1% of the total hydrogen production that's on Earth right now. It's not a lot. It's growing, but it's not a lot. It may be used to decarbonize sectors which are hard to electrify, as Hugh pointed out. And a good point is data centers are hard to electrify. They're very costly. And we prefer to do it supposedly with green renewable technology from green hydrogen than, let's say, coal-fired power plants that are common now. In addition to that, other areas that are hard to electrify are cement and steel production plants, and they have issues with using up huge amounts of electricity and creating a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. Just to give you an example, cement, we know, is between 5 to 7% of the carbon that's going into the atmosphere on a daily basis in the world. And by the way, China produces huge amounts of cement. In fact, China in 2019 produced more cement than the United States did in 200 years of cement production, which is quite remarkable. So that's another issue. The high cost of production is the main factor with green hydrogen, by the way. And but nonetheless, I believe, and it's based upon my research and my interaction with people who are involved in green hydrogen and exploring this area, and especially in the EU, the green hydrogen market is expected to grow. And some of the forecasts of the cost of hydrogen production are falling from $6 a kilogram to, and that was back in 2015. It might have gone up a little bit by now, but I think it's going to go down to around $2 a kilogram by 2025. There are major European companies that have announced plans to switch their truck fleets to hydrogen power, but I think that's going to be an issue. One of the issues is that green hydrogen or hydrogen of any type is gas, and therefore the infrastructure exists in Europe, especially now that Europe is trying to move away from Russia with regard to gas production. So that infrastructure and those pipelines exist, and if people like in Germany or in other countries in Europe are able to produce green hydrogen, they can pipe it around. The infrastructure exists, and you could probably get the hydrogen to market in infrastructure and gas stations. As Rob pointed out, the filling stations for them exist. The question is, you'd have to input systems that take in that type of fuel and displace it with special type of nozzles. The other area that people haven't talked about is that green hydrogen is thought to be able to be useful in agriculture. I know that may surprise some people out there in the audience, but that might be very relevant for the developing world. because green hydrogen hopes to create what's called green ammonia, which would be cost competitive with ammonia generally produced conventionally, gray ammonia, maybe we give that name, by 2030. And so I think what we're seeing is a deployment of a new concept, pretty new, relatively speaking. It's been around since the early 2000s. People have been working on it. Scientists have been working on it. But right now, it's very expensive to produce, and I'm not sure it's going to deploy very rapidly soon, rather than, let's say, other methods of being able to take other gases. So, for instance, from the systems that we produce, we have what's called pyrogas or syngas in Europe, and that has volatile organic compounds and PAH, polyaromatic hydrocarbons in it. But we have a genset that can actually take that and eliminate all those greenhouse gas emissions and create clean energy to the point where it's almost close to zero emissions. It's asymptotic. It's near zero. So I would say, as Hugh pointed out, there's going to be a deployment of different technologies. The big oil and gas companies have invested a lot of money in this, and that's what makes it suspect with the people who are, let's say, anti-oil and anti-coal and anti-gas. But I still think we have these legacy products, and I'd rather see legacy companies like coal manufacturers produce a greenhouse, green hydrogen if possible. And I don't want those people to be just shut out. I think they need to be accommodated and brought into the space of the climate crisis, because we do have a huge climate crisis on greenhouse gas emissions being emitted around the earth. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this is a complex topic. It's not a simple topic. Even chemists get confused in it. I've been on a number of panels around the world on this topic, and I was just in one in the United States, and some of the people were arguing on the panel, they're scientists, about the science, let alone about what's going on. And that's because it's a relatively new technology, and it's a relatively new approach, and there's different methods to create quote unquote green hydrogen. So we'll see what happens. The jury's still out on it, but I think hopefully we can see it happen. I do know one other thing, and that is, as everyone knows, I'm involved with the European Union Climate Bond Initiative, and they create taxonomies to prevent greenwashing. And one of the taxonomies they're creating is one on green hydrogen. They're developing that. It's in development right now. It hasn't been approved. And it will be approved by the EU Parliament and the EU Commission. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Paul. What you want to add?
Yes. Thank you. So it's important to know that, hydrogen in the form of H2, the gas is very, very rare on Earth because it is so reactive. Of course, hydrogen is, super abundant. It's in all living matter. It's in, the basic component of water. It's it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, but in the form of hydrogen gas is very, very rare. We have to produce it. So it's better to think of hydrogen as more like a battery than like a separate energy source. So, we can use electrolysis as is mentioned with green hydrogen to break apart the water molecules with 2 electrodes, and the hydrogen bubbles up one electrode, and we're producing oxygen at the other electrode. So, and then if we store that hydrogen, in order to store it in large quantities, we need to compress it or cool it so that it forms a liquid, and then that takes a lot of energy to do that. So what I'm saying now is mostly based on this book I've got, which I'll just show you the book here. Okay, so it's called The Hydrogen Revolution, A Blueprint for the Future of Clean Energy by Marco Alvera. And when I got the message that from Sharif that there was a session on hydrogen, of course, I dug out my book, which I haven't read yet, and I skimmed through quite a bit of it. So I'll just talk about some of the high-level sort of things how hydrogen can actually help our society, because it's been controversial over the past number of years. There was some argument that it would be great to power a place like Iceland, which it would be good for powering some smaller sort of isolated societies, but not so much for mainstream. But I think that is changing because of some of the benefits of hydrogen. So of course it's coupled very closely with electricity, right? I mean, we use electricity to create hydrogen, create the green hydrogen in the first place. But the hydrogen can also work in like fuel cells, right? Which reverse the process. So if you have a hydrogen operated car or something, then you have a fuel cell and you react the hydrogen that you've got contained in either a bottle from liquid form or gas form, compressed. You combine it with oxygen in the air, and that generates the electrical energy to run a fuel cell. And this technology has been used extensively in the space program, with fuel cells on board to produce electricity on spacecraft. That's sort of high-end usage. Very costly systems, but those costs are coming down, and we can see it being used on a common basis. So that's very important. As a battery, for example, if you have a wind turbine that is, it's offshore, it's very windy for a few days, you can store the energy rather than having the electricity produced being lost or being transported far distances. You can actually, near the source of generation, you can generate hydrogen. You can run the electrolysis process near the wind turbine, generate the hydrogen and store it, and then use it when you need it. So you get around the intermittent nature of wind. Also solar, during the day you can generate the hydrogen. Panels aren't running at night. You can burn the hydrogen to produce the electricity at night. So it's a good buffer to both wind and solar. It goes very well with those technologies. Also, some consider hydrogen sort of the new oil. So one of the things with renewable energy is that the power densities are very, very low, right? The power you're generating per weight. And this is why fossil fuels are ubiquitous, and we've used them to power our societies because they're easily transportable as a liquid, gasoline or oil, and they're very high chemical energy per weight, very high power densities. So some consider hydrogen as possibly the new oil. So the new oil, the new gas, you compress it. If you have very low loss containers, very, very high thermal insulation containers, it can last in them for quite a while, and you could power cars and trucks and factories and things, replacing oil with the hydrogen. It makes materials greener. The fossil fuel industry is used extensively, the distillation towers and things, to extract all these different chemical elements, many of which are used in materials manufacturing, for example, plastics, etc. So hydrogen could replace oil in a lot of these processes, because what's important from the oil breakdown is the hydrogen carbon chains to make many different materials, like I said, including plastics. And fertilizers was mentioned, the Haber-Bosch process to produce ammonia by breaking, using fossil fuels to produce the fertilizers. So we can conceivably think of replacing the fossil fuels to make materials greener using hydrogen. So it's not just using hydrogen as a battery or a power source, it's to create goods and materials in our society. I mentioned solving seasonality of renewable power. Green transportation, of course, is a big factor, whether it's cars. But then the question is it more efficient to use your electrical power to charge batteries and just have a completely electrical car? Or is it better to produce hydrogen by electrolysis and then using hydrogen to run the actual car? It sort of depends on the infrastructure we want to set up and where you are. Sure, hydrogen can go through pipelines, natural gas pipelines, but there is an issue in that hydrogen, because it's such a very small, tiny molecule, the leak rates from pipelines and valves, etc., is much, much higher for hydrogen than, say, for natural gas, which is CH4, methane. So we need higher quality equipment in the valves and the pipelines, and also we need to keep in mind corrosion, because hydrogen can combine with many elements and make, you can get super corrosive systems. So you need better plumbing, better piping. So I don't think you can just use pipelines outright without high leak rates. You need to check for leak rates and make them more airtight. Hydrogen is perfect for powering ships, and if we're going to go that route, rather than have electrical powered ships, which can be problematic, you can have hydrogen. Ships, you don't worry so much about the weight. I mean, they're massive structures, so you can have very large storage of hydrogen and run marine traffic. Hydrogen, the aviation industry is very keen to look at hydrogen, again, because of the it's hard to conceive of, a jumbo jet, commercial airliner running off of electrical power, but it's very easy to conceive it running off of hydrogen, being modified to run off hydrogen. And then it's a lot cleaner burning out the tailpipe. You just get water vapor, essentially. And we know, the power density is very high for hydrogen. Think of hydrazine, H2N2, basically, which is used to power many rockets. Many rocket engines run off hydrogen. There are some exceptions now. Methane is becoming more commonly used in rocket engines, which is the way that SpaceX has gone. And, all of these things require, safety. The Hindenburg, was filled with hydrogen because hydrogen was a lot cheaper and actually more buoyant than the alternative helium. So they knew there was a risk of the explosions, etc., but Germany didn't have access to helium. That market was cornered mostly by the US and other countries. Germany could not get access to the hydrogen or helium in large quantities, so they went with hydrogen. And the Zeppelin, was around and had a glorious career for a large number of years before the Hindenburg sort of ended that technology. I'd like to see the Zeppelins come back, the blimps come back with helium, being powered with helium. So we need, we're in a climate emergency. We're in a climate crisis. It's getting worse and worse all the time. We're probably going to head into global food shortages and price spikes very soon. And we need all the technologies that we can to create a revolution, to get off fossil fuels. People have talked about the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and the idea of carbon bombs is being discussed, where many of the fossil fuel emissions are just from a handful of large companies or large projects. So those projects need to be shelved, and we need to retool and go to a hydrogen revolution. And it's very easy to do if we want to do it. I think we get the military budgets and military expertise and scientists and engineers to take a couple of years off designing weapons to kill people and design infrastructure to save our planet from abrupt climate change. So thank you, Sharif, for running these programs again.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Talib Rafael, what you want to add for today's discussion, and if you bring some important strategy for this energy and gas sectors from developing world, especially from your country.
I'm not an expert on hydrogen and hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular. But what I can say is the following. We need to follow technology to its last drop. We need to invest as much as we can in that. It looks like, from what I hear from you, is that hydrogen is the solution to many problems. The problem is the money. How much are we investing in that? And I think we need to invest some money and energy into that. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Professor Rob, specifically, how we can do some research on innovation on that particular topic, and what is your concluding remarks for today's session?
Sure. Well, first I wanted to go over the different colors because it's fascinating how many colors of hydrogen there really are. Green hydrogen, which we've been talking about, what makes it green is it's produced by electrolysis using solar energy. So there's no emissions created by the process. Blue hydrogen uses a fossil fuel, but part of the process to create the hydrogen, but they use CO2 sequestering in underground, so the CO2 isn't released. So it's thought to be carbon neutral because the CO2 that's created as a result of the process is sequestered. It's basically put in an empty mine or a cave that's sealed. Gray hydrogen is produced from fossil fuel and comes from steam methane, but it does release CO2 into the atmosphere, so it's not considered green. And we've got black and brown hydrogen, which comes from black or brown coal, also that is not very green in terms of the process. Turquoise hydrogen uses thermal splitting of methane, but the CO2 is removed in solid form, so that should also be considered relatively carbon neutral because the solid form CO2 can be stored. Purple hydrogen is made using nuclear power through a combined chemothermal electrolysis splitting of water. So basically nuclear instead of solar, but the rest of the process is similar and considered fairly green. Pink hydrogen is generated through electrolysis through water, also through the nuclear power plant, also very similar to the solar process. Red hydrogen is produced through high temperature catalytic splitting of water using nuclear power thermal as an energy source. So using a catalyst this time. And then white hydrogen is the natural form of hydrogen, and of course considered to be very green, but as pointed out by others, fairly rare. Canary Media issued a report on green hydrogen just last month, 2 months ago, back in March. And and their takeaway was that it was very useful in areas that are hard to turn green. Steel manufacturing, for instance, is an industry that produces an awful lot of greenhouse gas, and hydrogen can be used to make that particular process a lot greener. But overall, the report found that using hydrogen instead of natural gas didn't appear to be viable. As was pointed out, the molecule is very small, and so you'd have to do an awful lot of work to fix transport. Otherwise, the leaks would come back to bite you. And as of the writing of this report, there were no green hydrogen turbines anyway that have been manufactured. The most hydrogen you could put into an existing methane-powered, natural gas-powered power plant would be about 20%. But because the energy density in hydrogen is about 1/3 that of natural gas, 20% would only have a 6 to 7% impact on greenhouse gases. So the impact would be far less than as a percentage would be far less than the amount of green hydrogen you're inputting in the system, and you'd still have those leaking issues. So it would require a substantial change in the power infrastructure, replacing the turbines with turbines that were designed to run off of hydrogen. I should point out also with regard to the Hindenburg was not powered by hydrogen. It's kind of bizarre because it had so much of it. It was powered by diesel. They were diesel engines that were used to power the Hindenburg, not the hydrogen it was lifted from. And as was pointed out, the reason that Germany didn't use helium was because the U.S. and the Western, the U.S. and allies realized that helium could be used as a weapon of war, and so they restricted it specifically from Germany, who they were afraid of at the time, and Germany had to convert the Hindenburg from helium to hydrogen in order to get it to work, and then of course it crashed. Ironically, it wasn't the biggest crash of a dirigible. 2 U.S. military dirigibles crashed, and more people died in both of those crashes than in Hindenburg, even though they were from helium. It was but death from collision in storm. So one of the reasons why we don't have any dirigibles at the moment, and just the Goodyear blimp, which I've been in, and it's quite a bit of fun, is because of the dirigible's inability to deal with heavy weather conditions. They got really dangerous in the weather, and so the military use of dirigibles was discontinued, I believe in the 1940s, because they were just too dangerous to fly. Currently, with regard to dirigibles, just as a side comment, we are looking at them for heavy lift, being able to move large objects significant distances where you couldn't use a truck or a train. Still largely in experimental form right now, but there's a possibility they could come back and be much larger, more blimp structured than dirigible structured, but be much larger than we saw with Hindenburg, and be used for not for transporting people, but transporting large objects. Back to the green hydrogen. In the end, the cost of implementing green hydrogen as a direct replacement for natural gas remains one of its largest limiting factors, coupled with the fact that we don't have existing energy capability in terms of turbines to create it. So it's possible we can go there, but the cost seems to be relatively prohibitive. And at least right now, it looks like the more effective way to move power to power plants would be the new classes of nuclear power, which have far more, at least appear to be far more affordable. However, the negative stigma connected to nuclear power, of course, is an offsetting problem. And we do have that problem of disposing of nuclear waste, which we're hoping the move to fusion-powered plants may be able at some future point to address. But with regard to green hydrogen, it looks like its most viable path is for either long-haul trucking, for transportation, and for use as a alternative power source in industries like steel that have had significant issues with regard to going green. I should point out that hydrogen does degrade steel, so you've got a problem if you're trying to pipe it through steel pipes, because it will degrade those steel pipes over time. So it's an interesting gas. It can be transformative, but it is not a silver bullet by any stretch of the imagination, and it is likely, given the fact that we're going in the direction of battery-powered electric cars as opposed to fuel cell powered cars at the moment, that it probably is going to be a little bit too late for this current transportation revolution, but it could be used in other areas. And that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, what's your concluding remarks for today?
There you go. Sorry about that. Had a little technology issue here. I agree with Rob's definitions of all the colors. I think he hit the nail on the head. I also agree with his concluding remarks that we're probably not going to see green hydrogen per se, being adopted fairly soon on a wide scale. It's out there. It's being developed. It's being worked on. And again, we both agree, he and I agree on the concept that it's useful for industries such as steel and cement in those areas. But those areas also have other technologies for energy power that are actually easier to develop, easier to deploy, lower cost. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle for green hydrogen, except for the fact that the people that are behind green hydrogen are the same people that produce gray hydrogen, which are the fuel companies. So, and of course, they don't want to lose their market, and they want to continue to produce oil and gas and coal on an ongoing basis, whether it pollutes or not. They care more about their bottom line and their top line. In fact, we just saw recently that Saudi Aramco became the wealthiest company on the nation, surpassing Apple. So I think this whole issue kind of reminds me of the old myth. I don't know if you folks out there that are watching remember the myth of the scorpion that approaches a frog and says, "Take me across the river, frog." And the frog says, "I'm not going to do that. You'll kill me." And the scorpion says, "Oh, well, if I kill you, then we both die." So he hops on the back of the frog, and midway across the river, he stings the frog. And as they're going down, the frog says, "Why did you do that?" He says, "It's in my nature." So I think the oil companies, the gas companies, the coal companies, I think it's in their nature to put profits before people and environment. It's just the way they've been doing it for the past 200 years. And I don't think they either grasp why they should change or not change. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, but even the big companies out there, financial companies like Larry Fink's, what's it called? Blackwater or whatever it's called. Blackstone, that's it. The financial company, huge financial company. He switched modus operandi. He was going for climate change issues, and now, without saying so, in his speech, he's starting to back more oil and gas companies to produce more oil and gas. And in fact, he's into the riches of Saudi Aramco. So his people. So I would say that the green hydrogen has a long hill to climb. And I agree with Rob. It has a purpose and a place. And I think, as Hugh pointed out, there's going to be other choices out there, such as a nuclear and other means of being able to create power without having to harm the environment. Now, nuclear does have its issues, but I think so do other technologies. And it's going to be a race. And that's what we're in the midst of. We're watching a race to the finish line. And the finish line's not that far off, folks. So if you look at the climate clock in New York City, you'll know where the finish line is, and it's not good news. So it's good news from the fact that people on this panel are moving forward through the World Talent Economy Forum to produce these kind of forums to educate people, but at the same time, hopefully create the opportunities to bring renewables into the world, and especially in the developing world, so that people can have great opportunities. By the way, the next COP session is going to be in Egypt, and hopefully I'll be there. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to travel, but if I can, I'll be there, and maybe we'll meet up there. So that would be great. It'll be in I think it's going to be Sharm el Sheikh is where it's going to be in Egypt. Great place to be if you've ever been there. It's a wonderful, beautiful area. The ocean is fantastic. I haven't been there in a while, so I don't know what the status is, but I believe that the Egyptian government has done some really great work there, and I applaud them on doing that. So again, hope to see everybody in Sharm. If not, we'll see each other on the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. And Mr. Marshall, as you are working with climate change and you are expert in impact investment, you will be happy. Elon Musk actually maybe, because we arrange some sessions on Twitter with the guideline of Professor Rob, and Elon Musk maybe listen about our voice, and he's coming to Indonesia for investment. So let's see what's happening in Indonesia and in Asia Pacific. So I'm from Asia Pacific. Maybe more interesting thing happen. So I want to invite you all in Asia Pacific. Yeah. Professor Ching, what is your concluding remarks for today?
First, the advantage of hydrogen and the green hydrogen in particular is that it's easy to produce. They can always be produced in many ways, such as green hydrogen, and also it's clean. So
it seems expensive.
relatively,
Things expensive.
And they also has a high power density. And the disadvantage, the first thing is it's expensive. The cost is bad, and also the storage and the transportation need some new type of structures. Also, finally, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It's combustible. However, the most important thing, I've been emphasizing this since the savings and loan crisis. We need the solution value to decide our priorities. And in this case, particularly in energies, in my view, I would like to really have some of my students look into nuclear reactor economics. And also my own field, the control fusion, which which people claims a lot, but I haven't seen anything really going to show anything feasible because there's many other things they neglected. So this solution value just take into consideration all the factors. Nothing can escape it, and it's calculated to infinity. It include both monetary and non-monetary returns. So it should be the way to decide all our priorities. And in particular, right now, I'm worried about the financial crisis that's coming. And I don't think anybody in the world knows how to detect overvaluation. It has to be detected by a solution value which people can trust. And so far, the finance spreadsheet, people claim they can do it, but I hardly think they can do it. Also, the once Marshall mentioned something, Earth 2, well, that project should definitely, it's actually Earth 2 is a valuation project, in my view. Okay, I'm not trying to criticize our own people, but I hope Marshall will mention it to your colleagues in the project. And it's all valuation. It has to go to infinity. It's a permanent consideration. So, I have this thing posted. I have a system posted on the web. So if anybody interested, I can let them know the link. Okay, so that's
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Talib, what is your concluding remarks for
Thank you.
today's session?
Thank you so much. I think what the professor just said is very important. I think nuclear reactors could be a solution. But nuclear reactors, like anything else, has its repercussions as well. So green hydrogen is probably one of the solutions. I admit that. But I don't understand it more. I cannot be a judge of all of this. What I can say is the following. The meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh would be looking at the climate situation, not just in the world, in the Middle East in particular. And the Middle East is a hotspot. You know that. Hotspot that people don't feel the urgency to move on. Because the people in the Middle East are busy doing other things. So now what we need to do is embark on a campaign to try and promote the most suitable solution for everybody. I think this forum, Sharif, is a very important forum for us to set our priorities clear and to decide what is it we're going to promote. Are we going to promote the green hydrogen, or are we going to promote the nuclear reactors or anything between this and that? It's important to make a decision on it, because without that, we won't be moving any step further to the front. Thank you so much, Sharif.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you for all your good efforts.
Thank you, Dr. Talib, for your continuous support for World Health and Economic Forum. Professor Paul, what's your concluding remarks for today's session? And especially if you want to give some advice, what actually Dr. Talib said that what will be the best approach for developing world solving these issues?
Well, nuclear has been mentioned a few times, and you can use any power source to produce the electricity and then generate the hydrogen. So it doesn't just have to be from renewables, but it does. It's part of the whole sort of system, the whole power system. We shouldn't try to think of just one possible solution, because there's many different elements including smart grid technology is very important for distributing the electricity where you need it. And it's a big component. And green hydrogen is also, I think will become a big component, as will likely nuclear. I know the Canadian government is promising small modular reactors being online by 2028, I believe.
Which government is that?
Canadian government. They're doing
Canadian,
a lot.
okay.
They're pushing it. They're working a lot to push the idea of small modular reactor technologies to install various places, and they're supposed to be a lot safer, and but that remains to be seen, and we don't have working small modular reactors yet.
That's right.
So that's that remains to be seen. That's an objective of them. In terms of green hydrogen and all of the other different aspects of hydrogen, it's important to think of the sort of life cycle analysis of what how people pushed biofuels years ago, and some people are still pushing it, and yet with all of the processing and the whole infrastructure to get to use them, may not necessarily be such a big benefit to the climate as people expected. So a whole life cycle analysis of these things needs to be looked at. There's no so-called silver bullet. It's more like a machine gun of silver bullets, to address the climate issue. But one thing's for sure is we don't have the luxury of time. The climate system is rapidly changing, and it's a real threat to our societies and our food production and clean water access. Everything. It's hitting everything, and we're seeing fossil fuel wars still going on, right? With with that, and I'd like to see a full emissions. I'd like to see a full accounting, an environmental assessment report sort of thing on the Russia invasion of the Ukraine, how it's affecting things, because there's obvious things that are coming out. I mean, Ukraine just announced they're not exporting any wheat because they need it to feed their population. India just announced that with the heat waves and loss of some of their crops, they're not exporting any wheat this year. And obviously Russia is keeping the wheat and grains for themselves. These are three big suppliers on the world market. So those are some of the obvious things that are going on. So we don't have the luxury of time. We have to we have to employ, we have to spend a lot of money and retool our societies so that we can survive what's coming down the pipes in terms of abrupt climate system change. So thank you, Sharif, for having this session.
You're right.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, anything you want to add?
I just want to congratulate the professor for what he said. I think what he said is very correct. The world needs to look at the food problem now. That's the most important and critical one. Wheat is going to be a problem, especially for us in the Middle East. We were the basket of wheat during the Roman Empire. Not anymore. We're importing wheat from everywhere. And now wheat is becoming a very, very rare commodity. Thank you, Professor, for pointing that out.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This way we are actually trying to create more awareness in the developing world. And yes, I think in many ways we are getting many of our audience, they are joining in our forum, they are collaborating with us, they are sharing a lot of our content, especially the students from different universities from the developing world. They are utilizing our content. Yesterday I shared that how Daffodil University, Daffodil Education Group, the chairman of Daffodil Education Group, Mr. Sobur Khan, he joined. He is also utilizing our content, sharing our content. This is very important for us. So I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. We do not go for any kind of commercializations. zero commercialization. So it's free, 100% free. So anybody can join. And actually, all of our speakers, I want to give special thanks because voluntarily they contribute for World Talent Economy Forum. And this is the way we actually developing around 550 episode. So hopefully, your more contributions, we can help more communities in the developing nations. Thank you, Professor Ching, Mr. Marshall, Professor Rob, Professor Paul, and Dr. Talib Rafael for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you. Thank you.